I'm Matt Bubala here with another Fountain Report conversation. We're joined today by Dr. Chelsie Estey. She is the new Chief Veterinary Officer at Hills Pet Nutrition, and we're here today to talk about the Hills State of Pet Adoption Report. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And tell me, in general, what is the state of shelter pet adoption right now? And what are you seeing as the biggest barrier to pet adoption?
Yeah, so this is the third year that we've put out the Hills State of Shelter Pet Adoption Report, where we're building on those findings year over year. And we are seeing that the majority of Americans, about 63%, are interested in adopting a pet from a shelter. But we know that there are some barriers around that. We know that the overall cost of care, the overall cost of pet ownership, including some barriers around housing. So availability of housing that can accommodate large breed dogs, for example, or even dogs in general, are proving to be some of the concerns that potential adopters have. But we are seeing some encouraging results. When we look at our Gen Z and millennial respondents, that interest in adopting actually goes up to about 75%. So we know that there's some real opportunity there with some of the younger survey respondents to actually get them into that shelter community and adopt. We know that once we get these potential adopters into the shelter, they have an overwhelmingly positive experience. And so the key really is getting those new adopters into the community. We know that that level goes up to about 80% when we say, are you interested in adopting a pet again? It goes from that 63% in the general population and then up to 80% for those that have adopted pets in the past. So overall, the cost of pet ownership continues to be that #1 barrier that we see. But there are some others that came through in the report. So things like the potential or perception of the time and maintenance required to have a pet, but also barriers around housing. So access to housing where they can accommodate a large breed dog or can accommodate a pet in general. That's certainly a barrier that we saw more prevalent in the younger generations of survey respondents.
So what kind of support can be provided by shelters or veterinarians to help these pets stay in their new homes?
Yeah, this is a really critical topic that we've fleshed out in this report. So within the shelter community, to begin with, we know that that pre-adoption conversation ends up being really important. So finding out what type of pet is a potential adopter interested in, what's their lifestyle. So making sure right there that that first conversation happens and that that pet and pet parent are paired appropriately. But then it goes beyond that. When we look at the potential reasons for relinquishment, one of the top concerns that folks had was around cost again. And we see our shelter partners are really stepping up in that space. So they're providing things like vaccine drives, mobile veterinary clinics, subsidized veterinary care, all of these things that help make veterinary care more accessible to some of these pet parents. And I think the other big piece is post-adoption resources. And that's where veterinarians can play a role. So I would say there's probably 3 things that our veterinary partners can do. There are lots of partnerships that we see exist between clinics and shelters where, again, coming back to that accessible care where they may have resources that are shared between the clinic and the shelter. There are particular drives, again, the spay, neuter clinics, those types of things can make that type of service more accessible. I would say the second area is around just being there in that post-adoption period. So we saw in the report there was a lot of excitement around the idea of adopting a pet, but we also saw that there's a lot of anxiety as well. And I think sometimes that new pet owner just needs to have a sounding board, needs to feel that they're supported and not alone on an island post-adoption. And that's where a conversation with a veterinarian can be really critical. Just letting them know it's okay. You're going to have some good days, you're going to have some bad days, but knowing that they're not alone and that they have those resources, I think is really critical. And then the third way I would say is around education. So veterinarians, veterinary technicians are familiar with the shelters in the area. One that helps with awareness for a potential individual that might be open to the idea of adopting or even fostering a pet. But the other is just that they may be familiar with resources that that particular shelter may offer to help again with that accessible care. Maybe it's training. One of the other findings that we saw was that one of the things that concerned adopters post-adoption was around some of the behavioral or training resources. So again, I think just that familiarity may help. And one of the really remarkable findings from the study was that in 95% of cases where a pet owner was considering relinquishing their pet, they elected to keep it when they were provided with those resources. So it's really such a critical area for keeping those pets and people together long term.
We're hearing so much these days about cats, how popular they are. Millennials love cats, the younger generations love cats. They're easier to have in the home. Is that data bearing out in pet adoptions?
We're seeing that momentum with cats is continuing, and it's certainly for similar reasons to what you just mentioned, right? The perception that perhaps they're easier to care for, or it may even come back to some of those housing concerns where it may be that a particular housing situation may allow for a cat and not a dog. But we are seeing that trend continue in this year's report as well.
Are there any particular types of animals you're more worried about that have a slower rate of adoption out of shelters?
That's a great question, because we're actually seeing that large breed dogs in particular are staying in the shelter longer. So their time in the shelter has nearly doubled since 2019. So that's a really critical group where some shelters are already creating some focused initiatives around these large breed dogs, where they may encourage a potential foster to have a large breed dog, or do it kind of a dog's day out where they take a large breed dog out into the community. One that may free up a little bit of resource in the shelter, but it also gets that large breed dog out, potentially on a hike or going to the park where they might meet their new potential forever home. So we're seeing more targeted campaigns and approach to trying to get some of these large breed dogs out into the community to find their forever home.
Between the State of Pet Adoption report and also your Clear the Shelters event, Hills really cares about pet adoption. It seems to be ingrained in your DNA. Why is it so important to Hills?
Yeah, it really is ingrained in our DNA at Hills. We want to be a major contributor to helping end pet homelessness in the US and in Canada. And this is why something like this report is so important for us. It allows us to fill in those gaps in critical information. It lets us get into the heart and mind of potential pet adopters, generate awareness around foster programs, and ultimately figure out where are those opportunities, right? How can we get more pets into new and loving homes? Because what we're seeing in the report is, while there are downward trends for the last 5 years in terms of the number of pets that are entering shelters overall, there were still 103,000 animals that were added to that total shelter population in 2024. So this continues to be a really important topic for Hills. With our Food Shelter Love program, which has been around now for 23 years, at this point we've provided $300 million in science-led nutrition and helped support 15 million adoptions. And you touched on the Clear the Shelters campaign, which is running the whole month of August, where we partner with NBC Universal Local. And we have, at this point, helped support 1.2 million adoptions in the US. And we look forward to continuing that moving forward as well.
Thank you so much for all the great work you're doing, Dr. Chelsie Estey, the new Chief Veterinary Officer at Hills Pet Nutrition. Great work as always. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Matt Bubala. That's another Fountain Report Conversation. We'll see you next time.